Carney destroyed as mass protests explode nationwide. This is true tyranny, reactions and analysis. Across Canada and the United States, an unprecedented wave of mass protests has erupted, targeting the leadership of Prime Minister Mark Carney and President Donald Trump. The immediate trigger in Canada was Bill C-2, a controversial law granting authorities sweeping powers to alter or cancel immigration documents without due process, raising concerns about civil liberties. In the United States, President Trump's administration has faced criticism for strict immigration enforcement, including mass deportations and heightened surveillance of immigrant communities. These actions have sparked widespread outrage, with citizens demanding transparency, accountability, and adherence to democratic norms. On June 14, 2025, dubbed No King's Day, over 5 million people participated in protests across the United States, signaling massive public dissent against authoritarian policies. Demonstrators carried slogans like No Kings, symbolizing resistance to perceived tyranny and the erosion of democratic freedoms under Trump. In Canada, similar demonstrations emerged, reflecting fears about Carney's immigration policies and the potential overreach of his government. Across both nations, citizens are mobilizing in unprecedented numbers, showing that people are willing to stand up for their rights and demand reform at the highest levels of government. In New York City, over 70 protesters, including elected officials and activists, were arrested during demonstrations opposing Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, drawing national attention to public discontent with federal policies. Similarly, in Chicago, federal agents deployed tear gas and pepper balls to disperse demonstrators outside ICE facilities, inflaming public anger and prompting further calls for accountability. These incidents illustrate a growing divide between governments and citizens, as ordinary people challenge policies they view as unjust, demanding meaningful dialogue and reform while maintaining peaceful resistance. The protests have also gained international attention, with solidarity demonstrations occurring worldwide, highlighting global concern about civil liberties and democratic governance in North America. Citizens and organizations from multiple countries have expressed support for these movements, underscoring the shared values of human rights and democratic accountability. The international response demonstrates that what is happening in Canada and the United States resonates globally, signaling a collective awareness of the dangers posed by unchecked government authority and the importance of citizen engagement. Politically, the repercussions of these protests are profound. In Canada, Prime Minister Carney is under intense scrutiny from opposition parties and civil society groups, with growing calls to amend or repeal controversial provisions in Bill C-2. Some cabinet members have resigned in protest, while others defend the legislation as crucial for national security. In the United States, President Trump's approval ratings have declined, and congressional investigations into immigration enforcement tactics are underway. Both leaders face a critical test in balancing public demand, policy objectives, and political survival. Media coverage has significantly shaped public perception of the unrest. Some outlets highlight the scale and determination of the demonstrations, emphasizing citizen engagement and the struggle for rights. Others focus on isolated incidents of disorder, contributing to polarized interpretations of events. The media's portrayal affects public sentiment, either validating the protests as legitimate expressions of democratic engagement or framing them as threats to social order. This influence demonstrates the critical role of journalism in shaping narratives and influencing the trajectory of political crises. Social media has played a pivotal role in mobilizing and organizing protesters, enabling real-time communication and coordination across cities and countries. Hashtags like #NoKings and #ResistTyranny have amplified citizen voices, spreading awareness of protests and grievances on a global scale. However, social media also presents challenges, including the risk of misinformation, online harassment, and surveillance of activists by state authorities. Despite these challenges, digital platforms remain powerful tools for civic engagement, facilitating activism that transcends geographical and political boundaries. Legal experts have raised concerns about the constitutionality and legality of measures promoted by both Carney and Trump. In Canada, Critiques focus on potential violations of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, while in the United States, debates center on the expansion of executive authority and its impact on checks and balances. These legal challenges could have long-term implications, potentially reshaping how governments interact with citizens and limiting overreach, as courts and lawmakers weigh the tension between national security and individual freedoms. The economic consequences of the protests are also significant, affecting commerce, trade, and investment in both countries. In Canada, business leaders are concerned that Bill C-2 may undermine investor confidence and complicate trade with the United States. Similarly, in the U.S., protests have disrupted local economies, particularly in urban centers, with industries affected by closures, transportation interruptions, and security responses. These economic effects compound political and social pressures, forcing leaders to consider the broader ramifications of policy decisions amid civil unrest. As the protests continue, the future of governance in both countries remains uncertain. Prime Minister Carney and President Trump face a pivotal choice: engage with public demands or risk further destabilization. The response of these leaders will be closely scrutinized, and their ability to balance policy priorities with citizen concerns will determine not only immediate political survival, but also the long-term health of democratic institutions. Effective leadership will require negotiation, compromise, and genuine responsiveness to public sentiment to prevent escalation. The mass protests represent a defining moment in the political history of Canada and the United States as citizens assert their rights and demand accountability. The scale and intensity of the demonstrations reveal widespread dissatisfaction with government actions, signaling a collective call for transparency, fairness, and respect for democratic norms. Observers worldwide are monitoring the situation, hopeful that leaders will prioritize democratic principles over political expediency and ensure that the will of the people is reflected in decision-making processes, setting a precedent for governance in both nations. Ultimately, these protests highlight the power of citizen mobilization against perceived tyranny. Carney and Trump face tests of leadership, needing to balance policy with public demands. Their responses will shape their legacies, influence political accountability, civil liberties, and democratic engagement, and determine whether citizens' voices are respected, with consequences that could echo for years across North America. Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe for latest updates.